Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Motogp Xtra podcast. I'm Rhys, and joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is Dill. Now, of course, MotoGP back to the Red Bull Ring this weekend. A very, very interesting weekend. Lots of different things happening, so we may as well get straight into it with Moto3. So it was a bit of a breakaway group, wasn't it, at the start of it? What did you think to how those guys got to the front, sort of broke away from the rest of the pack? Because you'd expect that maybe at Austria with the long straights that they'd actually stay together.
Yeah, it wasn't the usual race or even the race I was expecting, to be honest. I was expecting a train from 1st to 15th. Early on, a couple of riders made a break, a couple went with them, and then the Messia incident, which we'll get them into, really split them up and split them into kind of a group of four and then the rest of the pack. And then a couple of riders managed to kind of cross the bridge and get across the other group, but it was quite surprising. I know as of late in Moto3, the last couple of years, maybe since kind of 2020, the kind of traditional corner speed, slipstream race, how would you say, kind of the way the race plays out is slightly different to what we have now, where they slightly square off corners more. Stop and start is a bit more common in the class. So the bikes are changing, the riding styles are changing. I think the modern day rider is slightly different to what we would think of a lightweight rider, but it means that a lot of time you'll come to track and in your head you think of a perception that, oh yeah, it's going to be a real slipstream battle. And in qualifying it was very messy qualifying, with a lot of people trying to sit around wait for toes, people sitting on apexes and all sorts of rubbish as usual. But it definitely wasn't the race I expected. I was quite surprised that we had such groups, and I definitely think the Messia one really changed the face of the race.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one. I thought that it probably would be one big group, but I did think that because of the nature of the circuit with the hairpins, it was possible that it could break up because, like you say, these days they do square the corners off a lot more. I think when they're trying to push for lap time, they probably still do go for the corner speed route, but I think in a race, it's better to be quicker into the corners because you can just overtake people. Whereas if you try to count the corner speed, all of a sudden someone dives at the inside of you, there's nothing you can do. So I think that is the way. I mean, you made a couple of mentions there to the Messia incident. May as well talk about it. So I'm not sure exactly what happened to his bike, but coming sort of through the fast S's towards sort of the straight before turn 8 they were going through, turn 7, and his bike just sort of cut out with quite a few riders right behind him. Somebody hit him. Was it Sasaki that hit him on the back? Yeah, Sasaki hit him on the back, which could have been an absolutely nasty incident. Like a couple of the other riders around him had to sort of pick the bike up as well, and that's kind of what broke up the pack. One of those things where it can happen at any time, and it really is scary when you see it. I mean, just the way his bike just sort of stops immediately, I guess, because you're accelerating so much on the straight. All of a sudden, your throttle's not working anymore. And he was lucky. He was very lucky. We were very lucky that it wasn't a bigger incident. Obviously, there was just a bit of contact. They both stayed on, so it wasn't too bad. But it could have been an absolutely horrendous incident, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those typical incidents where I think we had one, I want to say 2012 Malaysia, where in Moto 2, basically, if something happens to a rider front, the riders directly behind usually can't shut the throttle and get out of the way. It's the ones that are 6 bikes back that are pinned in front. Just like they part to see, and then bang, there's someone doing 60 miles an hour slower than them, and they just hit them. Sasaki was so lucky, grazed off him. It could have been a broken leg for Messia the way he hit him. Also, the front bars could have been taken out of hand. Sasaki, he was lucky to continue. We were lucky that Messia and they kind of just grazed each other instead of actually a thwack, because that would have been a leg breaker, would have been a big crash for Sasaki. That could have ended both their seasons, and maybe even worse if it went badly. Could have been
in the track also.
Yeah, and it's you come out of, like you said, come out turn 7, you change direction really aggressively for 8. It's a fast bit of track, as pretty much most of Austria is. So it was one of those scary incidents, and it's horrible because it's happened before where exactly the same thing happens, where someone has a moment, someone has a mechanical, the riders always directly behind can see it happening and they get out of the way. It's the ones that are unsighted. Being unsighted on a racetrack is one of the scariest and most kind of deadly things that can happen, really. So we are very lucky the outcome of what happened. We still don't really know exactly what happened. Initially we thought chain jumped off, change direction, small whatever wobble, chain jump, but there was no sign of the chain flying off. Usually the Dorna cameras are pretty good at catching chain fly off or something actually happening. So it looks like just it packed up, seized, whatever happened, we don't really know. So it's a strange one, and I probably would say that's his season done in terms of championship, would you?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it was kind of already
questionable.
going down a little bit with the crash. Obviously, Silverstone wasn't too bad. He crashed at Silverstone, Holgado crashed at Aston, so they almost cancelled each other out in a way. But of course, he was already a bit behind him. If he hadn't had the crash at Silverstone, I'd say he was still definitely on for it because he's looked really, really good the last few rounds. And, you know, he could very well have won today. You don't know actually what would have happened. I think he would have struggled on the Honda, to be quite honest, but you never know. But I think probably that is the championship over. And like you said, we don't know what happened yet. I imagine it'll be an electrical problem regardless. You know, that's usually what you get told. So imagine that will be the official party line. But what actually happened to the bike, I guess we'll probably never find out. But from one rider that had a pretty bad race there to one that had a very, very good weekend, Colin Veyer really making a name for himself in Moto3s. He's had some signs of brilliance so far. Was he on the front row back at Sachsenring, if I'm not mistaken?
P3, I think he was, wasn't he? Yeah. Yeah,
P3. So he's had a couple of sort of moments, but this time he really has made that step. And to be fair, very kind of surprising. Like, obviously, he's been making progress throughout the season, but you wouldn't expect him to be the kind of rider that in his rookie season would just put it on pole straight away. He's put it on pole here at the Red Bull Ring and then rode a really good race to fourth place. It's a shame that he wasn't able to finish on the podium, but I was really, really impressed with him. I imagine you probably were too.
Yeah, it was one of those riders where you think, great, he's on pole, but will he be able to sustain it? And I think even the world feed and the BT or TNT commentators kind of were kind of doubting that maybe if we got a runaway pack like we did, that he probably would get dropped a small bit and probably end up having a lonely race, but he was actually there the whole race. It just came to the last few laps, the top 4 or 5, whatever it was. He was just kind of, it felt like that. It was the Maverick Vinales syndrome of, I'm here, but I'm only here just to match with you. I have nothing else. I can't go anywhere with this. Like, I'm keeping you under pressure. So if you run wide, I can overtake you, but there's nothing more. And I felt like that was just his limit today. But nonetheless, fabulous race from him. And the fact he's on pole, we've already seen him put out some good laps in previous rounds. And I think if I remember correctly in Sachsenring, he didn't have the best of the race. So he kind of went backwards, if maybe even crashed, if I'm thinking of the right race. But today's show, then there's no fear of his pace, and he's definitely got under the radar. If you think of the likes of Alonso have come through, there's a lot of Spanish that have come through over the last couple of years where they've won CV, they've won Red Bull rookies, they're tipped from the age of 14, and we've known about them. But Veyer came up and he's been obviously a hot property, but they're all hot property. That's kind of the thing. So he's kind of been not really talked with as much as like Alonso, who won last time out, and that's probably why today's result seems a bit better. But I say the people from the Netherlands have probably kept quiet about him, because he seems to have gotten to a level that he's quite competitive without a lot of banging of a drum about him. So I'd say they're probably looking at maybe a future star in the class, and we'll see where he can go. Obviously we have Zonta in Moto2 and Bo Benschneider, so there's a couple of Dutch riders, so maybe we could see a Dutch rider in the top class in a couple of years. I don't know, but today's result for him, and it was brilliant. He'll only go from here. Massive for confidence, and a track like this, it's quite weird, so it'll be nice to see if he can back it up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, hopefully he'll sort of build a little bit of form. I think he was the first pole sitter in the lower class since Jürgen van der Gerberg back in the day, so it was a very, very long time since we had a Dutch rider set on pole position. I thought maybe Bo Benschneider had actually got one in Moto3 at some point, but I guess not. He did struggle with his size. I think Veyer is quite a big guy too, like he's quite tall. So
yeah, it's
good that he's showing some talent now, because he might struggle a little bit due to his height, bit like we've seen with riders in the past, and it might allow him to get up to a bigger bike in a couple of years, you know, because they know the talent is there. But hopefully he can try and build on it. And like you say, it's a bit of a weird circuit, so it'll be interesting to see if he can build on that form for the next rounds. But a couple of quirky tracks he has been quite good at now, so I guess we'll just have to see how it pans out. He's with a good team, so it could really go up, and he's got a good teammate that try and learn from and data to look at. So yeah, hopefully Colin can build from here. But another rookie then that was very, very impressive, obviously in the last race, going from last place to first. As I saw online, there was a joke going from first place to last this time, unfortunately for poor old David Alonso. He was looking really good once again. I mean, he's clearly made a step in confidence. Obviously, he got his first podium back in Jerez, so he's been up there pretty much the whole season. I think he had his first top 10 finish in round 3, so he's been up there the entire season. But obviously, he's crossed that bridge, made a first win in the last race. Again, looked really good, looked fantastic all weekend, looked like probably the fastest rider all weekend, to be quite honest. Gets up into the lead of the race, and then pretty much immediately crashes at the chicane. So yeah, I just such a shame for Alonso. I didn't expect to him to go down. I've been very impressed with him all weekend, very impressed with him last weekend, but yeah, it was just a bit of a shock and a bit of a shame to see him fall out of first place.
Yeah, to be honest, he was the quickest guy all weekend. I was shocked when he didn't get pole. It was just one of those kind of Moto3 sessions where whoever got the perfect kind of slipstream and perfect run and the right time at the right time, right place, right time. And unfortunately, he just didn't get the probably lap in qualifying, because on Saturday morning he was like half second clear at one point of everyone, so he really showed great pace. Kind of got caught up as well in the Messia incident, so he was one of the riders that made the bridge of the gap. So he definitely had speed, and it was probably what you would call a rookie mistake. Probably got to the front, used maybe slightly too much tyre, thought that bang, I'll smash through these guys and I'll disappear out the other side and I'll just gap him, and probably doesn't know his limit yet, and that's probably just what we saw today. And it was a shame to see him crash, because as we'll get to in a minute, the last lap was absolutely epic, and another young feisty rider would only have made that even more interesting, and it could have been even more crazy. But he has a lot to learn still. I know he did brilliantly in most of the season. He's been brilliant, getting his first podium in Jerez, race win in Silverstone. There's a lot to come from Alonso yet, so I'm keeping a keen eye on him to see how his season goes. But today is just one of those races where probably could have won it if he didn't have the incident with Messia, and then probably blood went to the head, rush of blood and all that can happen. And when he got back to them, thought, I'm king of the world here, and he'd probably keep pushing on, and just a small mistake at a corner, to be fair, that probably was into double digits for crashes over the weekend. It's really rippled in there. So yeah, it was an unfortunate mistake, but again, he'll learn from this and he'll come back stronger.
Yeah, it was one of those corners where it's easy to fall off. I don't know if he just clipped the white line on the way in. I'm not too sure. That was my first sort of impression of it. But either way, it is just one of those things. It doesn't matter. He's not in the championship fight, so it's just something he can learn from. But I think we could both agree he's probably going to be favourite for the championship next year, based on the performance so far. I think obviously it does depend who stays in the class, but even still, I think it's probably looking like he could be yet another fast Aspar rider. I don't know if I've heard that one before. I think he's must be quite good at picking out talent, old Jorge Martinez. But of course, you did mention there, another fast rider at the front would make that last lap battle even better, but it couldn't have got much better, could it? It was fantastic battle. Holgado was really getting his elbows out. We've not particularly seen him look so aggressive, I don't think, this season. I thought he looked a little bit desperate at a couple of spots personally, but I think he did probably manage it quite well. Of course, he led most of the way, but then he's had a pretty good battle with Sasaki. Onshu then actually comes through a very reminiscent move back to 2020 in the Motogp race when Espargaro and Miller both ran wide. It was a similar thing, although they kept it on the track this time, and it allowed Onshu to sweep through at the last corner as they ran wide, as Holgado sort of dived at the inside. Him and Sasaki both ran wide, Onshu at the inside, so it was down to the last corner. That's always what you want to see in a Moto3 race. And it was clean also, so that's also a bonus.
Yeah, it was really aggressive, really on the edge, really close. I think was it Sasaki or the two Red Bull bikes, did they, coming out of the downhill turn 4, did they kind of go side by side and touched on the last lap? It was so close. Was
Sasaki and Holgado.
Was it? Yeah. I remember two riders coming very close in a small little contact. It was brilliant, and like I said already, if Alonso's in there, it would have been immense just to see what he could have done, because he seems like a wily fox already in the last battles. But you do mention, alright, that Holgado, I reckon he's probably at the point now where, after thinking of crashing Assen, I kind of want to start maybe winning a couple more races. He probably wants to, in his head, maybe I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I'd say maybe he's thinking, if I win a couple more races and instead of coming third or whatever, that I'll just stretch the points gap so I can take the pressure off when we go to the flyways, when you go to the likes of Indonesia, where the weather can be 10 seasons in one day. Sepang can be the same. You never know what you're going to get in Buriram. So tracks like that where maybe he had a really tough last year, he's maybe thinking that far down the road. He seems like quite an intelligent young man, so maybe he's thinking that I need to capitalise on the European round. So if I have a mare when I go to the flyways, I won't have as much stress if I have a bigger points lead. But for whatever reason, they seemed like he really, really wanted to come first. Came second by 0.02 of a second or something ridiculous. It was a complete photo finish. It was ridiculously close. The photo finish, as they carried him across the line, I had no idea at all who won it. I was just going by the timing tower and it was on tube, but no money in the world could have told me how close they were, and I couldn't have guessed. I wouldn't have been able to put money on either of them who won it, because from the TV camera they literally crossed it in symphony. It was brilliant to see. Sasaki did so well. He's someone that he's not always the best in these last laps. He ends up maybe going too early, and I think again today he did. He was so quick through turn 7, 8 that he could have made a pass into 9 and probably held it in 10 to the line, and then went in turn 1, and then you're thinking, oh, probably shouldn't have done that. Then got passed down into turn 4, or he got passed into 3, then repassed him into 4. Then they were side by side, and he lost out from that, and that's kind of how it all planned out for him, and that was his race run until the last corner. And then there's all the moments, and then you've 2 Red Bull bikes that are literally, might as well one of them crossing line, and unfortunately Sasaki again just kind of got on the wrong side of everything again, as he kind of does really. Sasaki seems to be, of a Moto 3 rider, he seems to be the one that likes to get out front, kind of open the corner up, sweeping lines, and is probably not the best battler. And I think a lot of times in his head he's like, I have to go, I can't leave it too late, I can't make 3 passes on the last lap. Whereas likes of Holgado, he seems to be able to do it a bit better, and obviously we know Anshu is ridiculous when it comes to overtaking and his skill and the way he can drift a Moto 3 bike in. And Anshu winner today, I must say I'm really impressed with him, because we talked about him before. Remember back in Argentina where he just was over the limit everywhere. He seemed to have,
that was ridiculous, wasn't it?
He seemed to have learned from that really, because he's definitely settled down. He was definitely probably the calmest head today, which is not what you'd say about Dennis. In fairness, he seems wild, but he was he's just started to maybe figure out the puzzle a bit, that I need to be here at certain times, and he's probably going to continue to win races. It's all but confirmed that he's going to go up to Moto 2 to the IO team next year, replacing, I imagine, Acosta or Arenas. I think Arenas is out, so it'll probably be a new 2 new riders in the IO
lineup there.
So it'll be good to see him on a Moto 2 bike. He is quite tall, so
could be both of them. Could be Onchu and Holgado, to be fair.
You think I'd be surprised if Holgado went up that early. He's like,
if he wins the championship, he's not going to stay.
Yeah, true. I still think
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but would it be too early, too quick, too soon to, like, I don't know. I think that it would be too much for him to go up straight away 2 seasons in Moto 3. And I think he needs maybe another year, even if he wins it, go up as a 2-time winner. That would be some statement to go up as a two-time Moto 3.
No one's ever done that before, have they? So
exactly, like, records are there to be taken. So maybe he'd try something like that, but he still has to win this one, I suppose. But maybe I don't know.
That's true. We're kind of a bit carried.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he'll win next year. He'll win this year. Then he'll go and do a double in Moto 2. He is quite tall as well, though. So maybe Io has him lined up. Aki Io has an eye on that. But from what we can see, obviously we know Pedro's going up to GP, but Arenas is going to lose his seat. He is looking like he's going to Fantech apparently. So we'll see how that goes. But
I've heard everybody's going to Fantech.
I know.
They've got about 20 riders signed, and they've got to have 2 seats. So.
It's like the KTM GP syndrome, where every rider's going to
go 2s up, like.
But yeah, so crazy race down to the last corner, down to the last run to the line. Nobody had any idea it was going to be that good. It was so clean as well, which is always in the back of your mind in Moto 3 that one of them is going to trip himself up and take out 3 of them. But in fairness, today they were all inch perfect.
It seems like you're saying that when Onshu decides to use his head, there's a clean race.
Possibly, yeah. These 2 facts are connected.
But yeah, I think, to be honest, we'll talk about Sasaki. I think he defended too much into turn 9. Like, he was way too far on the inside. But no one was going to be able to pass him into there because he was so fast. I mean, maybe he didn't know that, I guess, because we have all the TV shots, so we knew that. But no one was going to be able to get alongside him. So I think he went too defensive there and left him open to the last corner pass. But yeah, Onshu played it perfectly. I think he knew today that if he passed anybody in the corners, he'd just get dragged to the line anyway, or dragged like towards the next corner. He said that as much in his interview. So I think he just decided to try and pick up the pieces from their battling, which, he was up to second at one point earlier on the lap when Holgado ran, obviously, Sasaki wide. I think he led very briefly there, but they both dragged back past him, so we kind of case in point right there that he clearly was losing a lot of time on the straights. And then, just the thinking man's ride. I mean, it's the Oliveira strategy, isn't it? Which is he's definitely a thinking man's rider. So, it was a surprise to see from Onshu, but maybe he is finally sort of learning. Probably as well, now that he's got that first win off his back, he doesn't feel like he needs to dive bomb everybody, like to try and get the win. Like, he probably thinks like, right, we can try and do this through like strategy rather than just dive bombing people. Like, I mean, he basically won his first race like that. Really, he sat behind Sasaki for a long time and then just passed him right at the end. So it was a good ride from Dennis Onshu. And since you said you might be moving up to Moto 2 next year, that kind of brings us on to Moto 2, a bit of a probably bad segue there, but well, whatever. Doesn't matter too much. It was a lot of crashes early on in the race, a lot of crashes throughout the race, actually, in Moto 2. It was not many riders going back on. I think literally the top 20, I think, were the only riders that didn't crash. And there's like 28 riders in Moto 2, so I think there was at least 8 crashes, something like that, which is pretty remarkable, really. There's a lot of accidents, but I think it's one of those tracks that's easy to crash. There's so many sort of slow little corners. That chicane, like you mentioned earlier when we were talking about Alonso crashing, it's very easy to crash. Hot, greasy conditions, so it was a very chaotic race, wasn't it? There's so many crashes.
They all came early as well, and I think that I always feel that Moto 2 gets shafted with times of their sessions because they go after GP for most of the weekend and in the race before, so the rubber's always different. It's always at a different time of the day. The race time is like, they rarely get to go out at their actual race time, so a lot of times you come to an actual race for Moto 2 and the conditions are totally different to what you've been doing all weekend. You've just different track temperature, you've different rubber down, you've all sorts, so it probably is a part of why Moto 2 can sometimes be a bit boring, because they all have to kind of manage a small bit and kind of just figure it out. But Arenas crashed twice, Joe Roberts crashed. There's so many riders that, like, we're not talking backmarkers or rookies here, like these are top riders and top teams that are crashing. Canna crashed. He's nearly nailed on every week to crash. He's literally like Mir in GP. He's not like, how many times they crash a week? Like, he's the most crashes in the class. It's unfortunate for him at the moment, because he's someone I kind of look at like Dennis Onchu, where until he gets that win, he's not going to be right, and he's always going to have it in his head. And it's got to the point now where he even told us what the Dickie Bowl was about. He's come out with all these interviews saying that he's not going to go to GP because of tattoos and they won't take him, and he feels discriminated, and he's probably got a bit of backlash from that in the press, because I don't think it's true, really. He's not got a concrete GP offer because, well, prime example is look what he did today. Like, he wasn't.
I believe he may have lost sponsors from it. That I can believe, but I don't think it's cost him a MotoGP ride, because he's not even won a Moto2 race. So.
I've never seen him being heavily linked to a team. I know Joe Roberts was meant to go to Aprilia at like Scott Redding time, around then, after Scott Redding was leaving, if I remember correctly. That kind of period.
It was for 21, I think.
Was it 21?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, so he's one rider I know who has lost an opportunity, is probably kicked himself really with the current Aprilia, but
he said no, it's no fault.
Well, yeah, I know, but at the time that he was, when they wanted him,
it seemed like the right decision at the time.
Exactly.
He probably regrets it now. Yeah.
So in terms of Canada, I don't think there's any, like, they'll always probably reach out and be like, we're one of riders we might want on the bike. Like, everyone is always talking to everyone just to kind of keep themselves in the merry-go-round of the silly season. So maybe he thinks that teams have approached him for a promotion to the GP class and haven't picked him because of the tattoos. But to be honest, like, you're covered head to toe in leathers and a helmet. I know you can see his neck, like, but I think he leans into the tattoos too much. I personally don't think it's that much of an issue. Like, if you perform on Sunday,
it was a weird comment, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, I feel like it's something. What has happened with Canna is he's got in his own head. He was hot property in Moto 3 for a good 2 or 3 years, where he was the kind of up and coming guy, and he was really small and he was really quick and a good team. Won a few races, had a couple of goals at the championship.
Even then, he used to like underperform and crash a lot.
100%. These tendencies have always been there, and like, again, there's no question of his speed on his day, and he seems to be a very good qualifier. But the issue is that come Sunday in last 5 laps, he's never where he needs to be, and if he is, he'll end up somehow trying to way. He's a good habit of crashing when he's in good positions, or weekends where he seems to have the pace, somehow ending up starting, go back to 8 and have nothing, and then crash over there as well. So he needs to start out crashing, but again, I think it's a direct correlation that if he ever gets that win, his performances will just come on tenfold and he'll really flourish then, because it'll be a weight off his back. And if he started to perform more consistently and got a win or two, he then actually might be considered for a GP seat. So it's a harsh merry-go-round for him, the way his career is at the moment, because at the moment we believe his team won't be in the grid next year as well, so he's probably thinking of trying to put all his feathers out and try to impress some other teams in Moto 2 to get himself a seat, because he's another rider that's been fan-teched as well. So nobody knows
exactly. He's one of the guys on the front.
So it's back to the race today. It was surprising to see as many crashing, because again, there weren't really the rookies, and they all came in the same. Like there was, I think, like 3 or 4 laps in a row where at least one person crashed into chicane every lap. So it was just
Lopez
a weird
crashed
race.
there. Binder and Lowe's obviously went down together there.
Yeah, we never saw that back, which was weird.
I've seen stills of it. Basically, Binder just lost the front in the second part, and Lowe's couldn't avoid, and Lowe's actually hit Darren himself, and went over the handlebars. That's why he ran over to him straight away, because he was checking it was all right.
I saw that he tweeted directly, literally, well, they were probably just on the race, and he tweeted saying that basically what happened, that he couldn't avoid a crash rider, and that's what happened. But again, it was an unfortunate way. But just early in the race, it just seemed that like they were missing that bit of data, and that kind of maybe, I think maybe all the bikes were set up wrong, because we'll get to Acosta in a minute, and his race kind of went weird. And again, I think the bikes just weren't really set up for the conditions that they had, and that would explain some of the crashes.
Yeah, I think that probably is it. I think it just weird conditions, and like you say, you make a really good point saying that basically they run after MotoGP the whole weekend. Then when it comes to race day, they run after Moto3. So sometimes there is the jokes about the Michelin rubber, and especially when it comes to MotoGP and Vignale, it's a Dunlop rubber kind of thing. But it clearly does make a difference when that rubber is laid down. I think it does provide very good grip for the Moto2 riders when the Michelin rubber is down. So it does change things. It does change things quite a lot, and I think that's why we often see a lot of incidents in Moto2. But Iagora, a rider who's had a pretty tough season, to say the least. He had the injury from the pre-season, and just trying to come back from it has been difficult. But he had a good round back in Assen, kind of went missing again in Silverstone. But the circuit where he really looked strong in previous years, I think he's been on pole position here. I think he's won a race here. He's been very good at the Red Bull Ring over the years. He's sort of back to his best, back on the podium. Really good race from Agora. Looked like he potentially could have fought for the win today, but he didn't quite have the pace, and the other two managed to just pull away from him, of course, Acosta and Vietti. But he managed to hang on to a podium. Another podium for him. Just another step on his comeback, I would say.
Yeah, I type up the notes as the race goes on, and over the weekend I kind of notes of what I'm doing for the podcast, and I always love when I get to stick Iagora in, because I love talking about him, because he's just everything about him. I love the way he rides. Just everything.
The way he was sliding into the downhill left, it was unbelievable. Every lap looked like he was going to go down.
Yeah. There was a couple of times where like he goes out of shot, you're like, Jesus, no, he's not going to be there when the camera turns. He's going to be in the gravel, and then somehow again, and he was so quick through that. He's just everything. If you go back to Motegi last year, him going into the 90-degree left and stuff like that, it was so good. He's just. It's a shame that his injury and how the season last year ended and stuff like that, because in my opinion, he should be a double world champion. He should have won the Moto3 title. I think Arena should have been black flagged for that incident in Valencia where he came back out when he had crashed and started battling. That should have, for me, right? I know I keep going back to this. I always bring this incident up when I get a bit heated.
It comes up a lot. It does come up a lot.
That should have been the kind of determining factor in that championship. He should have lost the championship because of that. I still don't understand why he didn't get a bigger penalty for that. Spanish mafia, as a lot of people would say, but it was ridiculous. But anyway, back to today's race.
I don't think he got anything.
He didn't know they black flagged him. That's all they did.
That was it. He didn't get another penalty, did he?
Oh man, what an injustice. Anyway, Agora seems to be after finding it. We come to a track where you have to brake late. Look who shows up, Agora. He's so good on the brakes. Very, very Japanese. Was so unhappy that he finished third. God only knows what his interviews must be when he's finishing like 14th, because he was like, I think his post-race interview was, I'm not very happy, I'm annoyed at myself, I made too many mistakes, and like he didn't really do much wrong from what I could see, and I always keep an eye on him because again he's probably the one I don't really try to have favourites anymore as I've gotten older. There's riders I like more than others, but I don't support one rider more. I think when Valentino ended, I kind of probably subconsciously didn't want to pick one rider as I just didn't want to enjoy the sport, and I can enjoy when others win, and I enjoy when there's a battle and stuff. But in Moto2, Iagora is the one I always keep an eye out and hope he does well. And just with the injury at the start of the season, the kind of misfiring form, it looked like the team as well struggled this year. Again, I always think if you have a really good season, you have to go again. You have to go so deep and have such determination to go again and rebuild and find something to go more. And after losing the championship like they did last year, it probably was a big hit to the whole team. Iagora as well, then the injury, and just there's a lot of building blocks to where we got to. But he seems to be, in terms of speed and riding, back to where he should be at. Would be tipping him probably for next year's title if there wasn't a Dunlop change. I don't know, or the Pirelli tyres coming in, the Dunlop's going. I just don't know how that would suit someone who's so kind of aggressive on braking and drifting it in. I suppose Toprak does it, so maybe if you're going to go down that line. From what I can see and what I've read, the Moto2 teams will be getting a very similar tyre to the Superbike, current World Superbike tyres, so that would be kind of what they're riding on. So if Toprak can do it for a full 40-minute race, you'd imagine Moto2 bikes could do it, but I suppose we won't really know till next year. But overall, it's good to see him back to a podium, a couple of podiums over the last few races. His championship is obviously long gone. This year he just needs to win a couple of races, and if he does build confidence, come back, stay fit, we could see him really, really strong next year, and then maybe end up on a Honda in GP in 25 if they sort their stuff out. Please God, because I'd hate to see him go up and be what Nakagami is now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that's why he kind of chose not to go up this year himself.
100%.
Obviously, it turned out to be a very good thing because he got injured in pre-season anyway, and he wouldn't have been one to carry an injury onto the Honda, that's for sure. But yeah, it was nice to see him back. Obviously, you mentioned that the team has been struggling as a whole. Chantra was also pretty quick this weekend. I think were they third and fifth, was it?
Yep, Dixon fourth.
Yeah, so yeah, Dixon fourth. Yeah, actually, that is one mistake that Agora did make after he passed Dixon and was sort of starting to close in on Acosta a bit, and then he ran wide and got re-overtaken by Dixon. Yeah. That's probably the standout mistake of the race for him. And then maybe that's what he was referring to. Perhaps he thought he could go with Acosta at that point, but then he lost too much time there and had used too much tyre trying to catch him in that small period. That's potentially what he was referring to, one of the mistakes, and perhaps there was others that we saw off camera, but yeah. I do remember seeing that one. So yeah, it seems like Agora and the team as a whole do seem to be back at their best, which is nice. It's nice to see them at the front because they had a really good season last year, both of them really, and they've kind of struggled a bit this year, but it does seem like the last couple of rounds they perhaps have been a little bit more like they were in the last season. Now, Tony Arbolino, of course, started the season off in a very good manner, kind of the opposite really to Agora here, but it's really just started to just crumble for him. He's not been making mistakes or anything. It just seems to be lack of pace, just the last few rounds. I mean, if you ask me, I don't think he's ever really been quicker than Acosta this year. The only reason he was leading the championship was because Acosta sort of fell off at Le Mans, but which is not a slight on Arbolino because he made Acosta fall off by pulling away from him in that race and obviously being competitive in the championship up until that point. Of course, they had the battle at Kota, but generally, Acosta has been the quicker of the two. Acosta's been chipping away at that gap. But now it just seems like Arbolino's got absolutely nothing left for him. Maybe it's, again, maybe a team problem because Lowe's has also been underperforming quite a lot since Jerez, really. So, yeah, not too sure what's going on there. But just, again, it wasn't too bad. Like, he wasn't terrible. Was he P7?
P6 across the line.
P8? P6 across the line, yes, because he's been battling with Salac in the all race. But yeah. So it's not a terrible result. And like we always say, you have these weekends in Moto2 where you can't get in the top five because it's just so close. Everyone's on the same bike, so someone feeling a bit better than you, they can really make that difference. But so it's not a terrible result, but he's just not seemed to have that front running pace for the last few rounds. I just don't know what's happened to him. Just seems to have just completely sort of dropped.
I kind of make the connection what kind of happened to Vietti last year, where it's got to the point. Few less crashes, but I'm going to probably make a statement that might make me look foolish at the end of the year, but I reckon he's going to start crashing because what I've seen to start the season, he started like Vietti. He had good pace, was someone who came from pre-season comfortable, confident on his equipment, came with a good team. They got the results at the start of the season. Also, we talk about the crash from Acosta and Le Mans. And he's been really consistent where Iagora hasn't been there. Cannett's crashed. Dixon is Dixon, so he's had his mistakes, and I don't think that the Moto 2 team are as good as the Moto 3 team for them, so that's probably why Dixon is slightly, he's not like, look at Guevara, for example.
We're getting Darren Binder here.
Completely, exactly what I'm saying. Darren Binder ruined Dixon's, move on. But that was pretty much, like, Dixon's made his own mistakes. And he, again, I always wonder about that team. Is it as good as the Moto 3? Because I feel like the Moto 3 aspect of their team is really, 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 really well oiled, really consistent. But I just find that maybe in Moto 2 they're a bit less consistent, and they kind of have been even in previous kind of iterations of them. But it just, I feel like Acosta's had a mistake at one round. He's went missing in the wet in Argentina, so he's had a couple of rounds where there's a couple of points gone astray, whereas Arbolino it's just been consistent throughout the season. And the point I'm trying to get to is that I feel like he's overriding at the moment, and that's why we're seeing him P5, P6, P7, not on the podium. Hasn't been on the podium since Sachsenring, which is quite a while ago if you think of it in terms of championship points. And I think he's going to have to, he's probably been riding at 95% up to now. He's probably at 99% now, and I think going forward, since he's losing more points to Pedro, he'll feel, well, I'm going to have to go into the red zone and go into that dark closet and just see what I can pull out and get to work like, and see can I start getting these results, because there's been tracks like Assen where we thought he'd go well, didn't really do anything there as well, was top 10 consistently, like, but it was not, like, these aren't what wins you championship. You have these rounds through the season, no doubt every rider has them, but having 4 on the bounce is just a bit worrying. So I think currently the championship is out of his hands. I think it's in Pedro, where if Pedro makes a mistake, it's injured, or kind of mechanical stuff like that. I don't think that Arbolino has it. I kind of, in my head, I look at it as the 27 GP season where outright pace, Davi was never quicker than Marquez, but he just had a couple of things keep him in the championship till Valencia. I think we're just seeing that the swing of this happen earlier in this year for the Moto2 class, where if we'll say we went to Assen and Acosta DNF'd, and then we put another 16 points on Arbolino, and then maybe Arbolino has slightly more pace throughout the season, it could have been dragged down to the last couple of rounds. But I think for the rest of the season, I just see Arbolino losing more and more points, and I wholeheartedly believe that as he drops further back, he's going to try hard, and there will be a crash or something will happen, and that then will kind of take the pressure off. And if you're Acosta now and you keep seeing these points each week, you've caught him, you've beaten him each week, he's nowhere near you on track, you're not battling week in, week out, you're out qualifying him, you're showing great pace throughout the weekend, and you're having P1s, P2s, P3s every, I think the last 5 races he's been on the podium, whereas Arbolino hasn't. So it's going to be tough for Arbolino. He's going to need some sort of fortune. And again, you mentioned kind of rightly that it looks like the VDS team is underperforming slightly for whatever reason. They just don't seem to be getting the best out of either rider since kind of the early Europeans round. So it'll be interesting though, because you'll see going to the flyaways, anything can happen. So the championship could go on its head, and that would be what Arbolino's probably hoping for at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether maybe the VDS team is just because there's so much going on behind the scenes of the Superbike team, maybe they're trying to set up a lot there, and so maybe some technicians are being moved across and stuff. So perhaps maybe that could be why they're dipping in form, because there's other things going on behind the scenes. You're not too sure.
Potentially, yeah.
But I think generally it's a bit more, kind of reminds me of sort of 2019 and 2020. It's it feels like maybe a bit of a, not a weaker field, that's kind of the wrong word, but a bit more, people are not as consistent. They're all very similar in terms of their absolute pace, aside from Acosta. Like Acosta sort of a step above. Feel like, you know, in terms of, like, if I'm being honest, like the pace between some of the other riders is quite similar. Like, I think actually Arbolino and Dixon's actually pretty quicker than Arbolino, but he's just not been as consistent because, as you say, like obviously the last few rounds he's been kind of nowhere, Arbolino, but Dixon's kind of been there, you know, nearly on the podium. So and I feel like there are other riders like that as well in the championship. I feel like Agora is one of those guys. Obviously, he's missed out those first few rounds because of injury, but I feel like again he's probably actually got more outright pace than Arbolino, but like it's just not as consistent. I think that's kind of what the problem is. I think that Acosta kind of has both pace and consistency, but nobody else does. If that makes any sense. Like,
yeah,
I feel like obviously on Arbolino's day, to be fair, you know, he's rapid. Like you saw back at, like, he's won a few races this season. Of course, back at Austin, he had a great battle with Acosta. Obviously, Le Mans, you know, he was pulling away and forced Acosta into a crash, but those are like a couple of maybe outliers more than anything. And Le Mans, very easy crash. Museum Corner, easy crash to have as well for Acosta. So I think that's kind of the problem. I just don't think he's got that level that Acosta has. So I think maybe you're right. If he tries to find it, maybe he'll crash. But I feel like maybe he more knows that there's no point crashing out of P6. You may as well secure that P6 and hope that Acosta maybe makes a mistake, or maybe wait still another day. I feel like he's maybe a bit smarter than to try too hard and crash, because I think he would have done it already if that makes, you know, because that lead was being whittled away. He's now lost the lead, so it would have been sort of this kind of round where he would have crashed because he'd have been trying to, you know, thinking, right, okay, I need to start beating him now because he's in front of me. But Yeah, just one of those things, and obviously maybe we'll be completely wrong. By the end of the season, it'll be Arbolino winning the championship, but I don't see it. I think it is just Acosta's to sort of run away with now. And Acosta, of course, tried to run away with the race as well, but probably went a bit too soon, used a bit more tyre than potentially meant to. I think generally that strategy has worked for him this year. I think he's done it a few times and then just been able to manage the gap to the end, but this time just didn't seem to. He had a few moments. He almost hit the back of Vietti at one point as well when he came past him. So what looked like, to be honest, from halfway through, I thought it was an easier Costa victory. Ended up with the Costa in P2 today.
Yeah, he absolutely destroyed his front tyre in the opening laps. It was clear once we got to half race distance. He was probably the quickest man till about the final third, but the gap wasn't growing after about half race distance. Pretty much up until then, it looked like everything was going in his way. The sails were pushing him along nicely, but after kind of the mid part of the race, it looked like the sails went against him, and there was just a bit of drag, and Igor took a bit of time out of him, but then that leveled off. It looked like, again, maybe if Igor did make more mistakes than we saw on camera, maybe he used more tyre to kind of keep the gap. And when Vietti started coming, then I think Dixon started to match Acosta's times towards the end as well when Vietti was closing in. So again, we've kind of already talked about him. He's done enough today in his championship. He's taken a very good P2. Again, I feel like kind of back to like the Moto3 where Alonso's quickest man on track all weekend and didn't come away with the victory. Same thing here for Acosta. I think he put a bit of pressure on himself with it being KTM's home race that he wanted to go out and get the victory for the team, and probably maybe didn't stick to the game plan as much and probably wanted to make it more dominating, kind of stretch the gap, and hopefully that would have been a brilliant Acosta wins by 6 seconds, whatever. But I don't think anyone was accounting for Vietti's pace, and I think if we take Vietti out, Acosta dominates, wins by seconds. So it's Acosta kind of did perfect. Vietti just went above that again. So it was a shame really that Acosta just didn't have a bit more tyre, because imagine the battle between them for the last 2 laps. That would have been a beautiful little race to end off the Moto2 there, just having the two in a battle. But really, once Vietti got past, Acosta had a look into 9 at one lap, but considering that was the lap that he kind of ran on and almost touched him, and the front kind of folded a couple of times, had a couple of goals at it, and I think then he probably thought himself, I'll stick on him, I'll keep him under pressure, but unless his tyres go off a cliff or he starts making mistakes, it'll be 20 points for me today. But again, smart right, you don't need to win every race. You don't need to do America's 2019 season where first or second, like you can. I know second today, so it probably doesn't really back up the point, but he seems to have it in him. If you look at Assen, he didn't go over his limit and try and find time that wasn't there that day. He just took that third place. Again, once you're ahead of your main companion in your championship, kind of the battle against your main rival, and he's in 7th for the race and somehow managed to get to 6th, and you're 3rd, 2nd, it's great to win the races, and everybody looks back at the season and go, oh, he won 9 races that season, he really wiped the floor. It's not really the wins that win you the championships. It's a day where you don't really feel it, and you come home with a brilliant P2 when you beat rivals that maybe had something for you when coming started the race that they might have thought they could have taken more points off him. So the fact that he did reach the flag with a brilliant race and got P2 and was beaten by an astonishing performance from Vietti, absolutely perfect for his championship. Once he keeps doing this, doesn't crash, had a small crash on Saturday, so the mistake is still there. He's probably not completely inevitable to a crash, so it's going to be an interesting run-in, because we've seen already this season he has crashed. I think Moto2 bikes are probably easy enough to crash, usually just the way the class is. They're quite they're very, I don't want to say low tech, but they're such kind of basic machinery in some aspects, and the tyres aren't by no mean a special tyre or anything. They do a job, they don't blow up, and they kind of wear relatively slowly, and they're just an overall okay tyre. They're probably not the best in the world. So for Moto2, it's a lot to do with the tyres, and today when he used all that front tyre early, if someone had pace like Vietti, he was always going to get caught, and to be honest, Vietti had so much more when he caught him. So it was just a small little, maybe a bit of overconfidence from him, and that maybe cost him, because realistically he didn't really need to bridge the gap as much as he did. He brought it out quite early in the race, and that was probably his downfall really. But again, P2 is absolutely nothing to cry about. He's done brilliantly again today, and he's taken big points over his rival.
Yeah, I mean, we're slating the guy. He still came second. And I think, like you say, it's a good champions ride. He's done it a couple of times this season now. Same with like Jerez. When there's a rider that's not in the championship, it's gone past him, it's gone for a win. Kind of did the same thing again at Silverstone as well. Yeah, Aldeguer and Canet, not championship rivals. So he knows when he needs to win, and he knows when he doesn't. Like he just manages it perfectly. I mean, we may as well talk about Vietti now. Vietti he kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't expect him. Like I wouldn't have had him down. I would have had him down as like maybe a podium threat for the race, but I definitely wouldn't have had him down as a race winner. But it was very reminiscent of his early races last year, where he just had so much more pace than everyone. It just pulled away, and the tyre just kept it pulled away even more at the end. But the way he rolled up to the back of Acosta and just passed him immediately. Like literally, he caught him. Like he was bridging the gap. We saw that. Then it sort of swaps back on the run into turn 4 that Vietti's now right on his wheel, and he just rides underneath him at the next turn, like just as if he's standing still. Like he just rolled up to the back of him. It was an amazing race from Vietti. Nice to see the guy back because he's been in a bit of a dark place, right? Like the last year, like he obviously started last season phenomenally, couldn't really do anything wrong. He did have a crash at Austin, but everyone crashes at Austin sometimes. It's a bit weird. But then he just started crashing his brains out, and just the championship went off the boil, didn't it? But it seems like he's finally maybe recovering from that one. Obviously, the team changed from Valentino Rossi's team this year to the Fantic team. I think a lot of the staff have stayed, but I mean, I imagine they've probably taken some up to MotoGP maybe, and perhaps it's perhaps just a bit different behind the scenes. So perhaps they've taken a little bit of time to gel. And I suppose Fantic, they've bought that team, but I suppose they didn't probably pick the riders initially. I mean, I suppose they did pick Gomez, but obviously Vietti was kind of already there. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't want him, but I'm just saying you got to gel with that new management structure and stuff. So yeah, it's taken a little bit of time, but good to see the guy back. Really, you don't want to see someone having a bad time.
Yeah, he is a special talent, and to be honest, when he's riding well, he's really, really good just to watch. Just the way he rides the bike, he's so nice to watch. There was a slow-mo of him coming out of the final corner where back end is about a foot out of line, and he just holds it there and just powers out, and it comes back in so nicely. He's one of my... I find a lot with the Moto 2, it's not the most enjoyable to watch. I could watch Pecco ride around on his own all day because he's so good to watch. You can see a lot what's going on. Same with Fabio Quartararo and Marquez in his prime. In Moto 2, a lot of them ride in a certain way to get the most out of the bike and tyres and to get it to work. Vietti's one rider I do enjoy watching a lot in Moto 2, just the way he rides. And he's gone missing for the bones of a year. He obviously had so many crashes last year. Went from winning pretty much up until I think the mid part of the season, he was leading, and then ended up finished 7th with all the crashes. Then the VR46 pull out. He ends up in a different kind of structural team. Probably isn't as close to Valentino day to day with the new team. So everyone thought coming into this year that it was going to be a reset to start the season. Up until now, really, we have not seen much. We've seen glimpses in qualifying sessions, but in terms of races, he's still crashing quite a bit. But today, he was just phenomenal. I cannot believe what he did today because he just had so much speed. He seemed to put the bike where he wanted, whereas other riders looked to be slightly behind the bike. He looked like he was ahead. He just looked like whatever the track conditions today would do, just absolutely perfect for him. So hopefully he can kick on a bit because like last year, after the first 3-4 races, whatever, when he was doing really well, he was like on the list for Pramac. It was like, oh, he's going up to GP, it's a done deal. A bit like Arbolino, the way this season started, where he done really well at the start and just started to kind of pipe off now. So maybe the deals won't be happening for Arbolino, but I definitely think Vietti has a future in GP. I really like his riding style, and he's a tidy rider when it's going right, but just needs to find a bit more consistency because there's no question his speed and talent. He's definitely a potential championship challenger next year if he's still in the class, which he 99% sure will be.
Yeah, he's going to be in the class with the 7 other Fantic riders. It will be interesting to see where it goes, because there has been rumours that the Valentino Rossi's team are going back to Moto 3. So I mean, maybe they could return to Moto 2 as well. I don't know, yeah. But just be interesting, especially if Pons are leaving the class. There's a spot up for grabs. So who knows what might happen with Vietti? But hopefully he does stay in the class because, like you say, he's too good to drop out of the class. He's one of those riders. I mean, shown today, he might have had a rough period, he might have had a rough season or so, but he's still clearly very, very fast on his day and capable of beating someone who has been touted as sort of the next Marc Marquez in a straight fight. So, you've got to be pretty decent if you're able to do that one. But moving on to MotoGP then now, obviously, probably the thing that you're thinking is going to be the thing that's discussed first. Obviously, the sprint race, the controversial sprint race, and resulted in a few riders going down at the first corner. Martin centered up the inside, sort of hitting the side of Fabio. Fabio was sort of sandwiched between Vinales, who had a shocking start from second place on the grid, by the way. Just absolutely awful to go into turn one. They all sort of closed up. So sandwich in the middle was Fabio. That sent, obviously, Quartararo, Vinales wide, straight into the side of Bezzecchi. He went down. They caught up Zarco in that one as well. So another Oliveira, of course, the unfortunate Oliveira getting taken out. So a chaotic start, something that's, there's always a chance of that. The turn one is so tight here, and because in MotoGP, it's so difficult to pass, especially at this circuit, which I think is probably something we will talk about in a little bit. The aero and all the things make it difficult. Turn one was just absolute chaos in the sprint, wasn't it? Martin just went bowling.
So, first question for you is, do you agree with the penalty? Would you have penalised him for what he did?
I would have penalised him, but I would have given him a double long lap if it was me, I think.
Fair enough.
What about you?
I 100% agree with that it was a penalty. Whether 1 or 2 long laps... two long laps, I suppose, would have been probably more fair because... he took out how many riders? He ended kind of Fabio's race. Bastianini, Zarco, Vinales. Yeah, the double long lap is probably about right for, because it wasn't ridiculous. It wasn't ridiculous. Like, he didn't skittle people, but he did start the pendulum, and he was the small domino that started the big effect.
It wasn't Nakagami at Catalunya, but
exactly, or Alvaro at Assen in 2011, I think.
Yes. 2012.
11 or 12. I knew it was one of them. I just guessed wrong.
11 was Simoncelli taking out Lorenzo.
Sure. Anyway.
That's so he got took out by a Grassini bike underneath him 2 years ago.
Exactly. Easily mistake to make, but double long lap probably would have. It was, again, it came up straight away saying reviewed after the race, which I understand why they do it in the sprint, but I don't agree with it. If they should have enough bodies that they can manage the current race that's ongoing in the event of something happening. They should also have enough people that they can deal with incidents at the time. Just because the race is shorter doesn't mean that they can't do their jobs right. I know technically...
I feel like maybe it's more so that they can have a proper look, get sort of opinions of different riders, and then maybe you should make sure the penalty is for the main race. Because if you get penalised in the sprint, you're not losing nearly as much as you would in the main race, because you're not losing as many points.
True,
maybe
too.
That's why.
But if you're... How many other teams going to protest yesterday at the fact that...
how many people on Twitter didn't understand the fact that reviewed after the race means that it's going to get looked at later? He didn't get away with no penalty like half the people thought.
Yeah, it's a interesting one, that. But Jorge Martin gets a podium, whereas Alex Marquez, I think Grassini had a little word about why he wasn't a penalty given out then. And a lot of people, I like, if you make a mistake, obviously previously, if you make a mistake in the race, you kind of get penalised in the race because it's the last session of the weekend. You don't really want to bring a penalty forward to the next weekend unless it was something really egregious or something. So I can understand that's why we have the sprint, and they can also put a penalty in the feature length race. But I like, if I screw up into turn one on this race, I want to penalise now. I don't like to kind of carry over, because make a mistake now, penalise me now. It's kind of the way I think. I think that's more effective. And I think a lot of riders
resulted in the incident that happened later as well, because he said as much in sort of the post race that after he'd had the contact with Marini that he was pushing for he thought he might get a long lap, but perhaps he was doing that previously also. So
yeah, exactly. So if it came across that he taking his long lap, he just takes a long lap and that's it. He's done. Then everyone's, I know it's not ideal because nobody wants to have a collision with other riders, but he's been penalised. He's sorted. Kind of, we move on and push forward for it, but. I suppose you bring up the Marini incident. Penalty or no penalty for you?
No penalty.
Yeah, I agree. I think elbows up Marini, and also I still hate chicane. I hate it with a passion. It does nothing for the track. I agree this section of track that was there before is dangerous, but it was a piss poor attempt from putting that chicane in my opinion. So again, Marini tries to hold around the outside, or hold it and just kind of keep with him on the outside. Probably should have given him more room. To be honest, right, Martin goes wider than I expected even before the collision happened.
Yeah.
But I suppose when he goes for a lunge, it kind of has
that's
happened.
The risk you take when you hang it around the outside.
Exactly. So I think maybe a small bit of understeer from Martin. He also probably realised, like we've talked already in Moto 3 and Moto 2 about crashes in the chicane. Jorge Martin probably mightn't have been at like 64, 65 degrees lean that he maybe normally was through the corner. Slightly more upright, which means the actually just push wide, and Marini's a bigger rider, so maybe less room probably resulted in the contact that we would have had. So it was unfortunate. Marini wasn't really too pissed off about the incident.
Even he conceded that like he could have probably picked up the bike. It was just one of those things.
He was just more concerned that the stewards gave a penalty out later to Fabio, which we'll mention, I suppose, and didn't give anything about there was no reviewed after the race or anything. They just gave him a straight penalty for an incident we hadn't been seeing on the feed. So just again, it's the kind of stewards inconsistency. We'll maybe touch on that again towards the end of the podcast. But turn 1 is a nightmare in that track. I don't like it in any class. It's horrible even riding through it on your own, because the curbing comes back against you, so you have to get the bike up, and it's a bit awkward. It's not really an ideal turn 1. It's kind of a nadry little thing. And we send 23, 24 GP bikes down there. It's destined to have an incident, I think, if you went back through.
It's just not a very good track for MotoGP, is it, really?
Not really, no. I think it's just the fact that it's the Red Bull track. I think it's...
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, right, take the actual physical track out, everything around it is good. You have the Red Bull Museum.
It's fantastic.
It's meant to be brilliant around the track and all that. So yeah, exactly. Facilities kind of make up for it. So in terms of on-track action, it's never been amazing. Obviously, Marquez and Davi had made it better for a few years, but...
you end any track with 2 hairpins, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not hairpins, but you know what I mean? Like corners where you can dive bomb.
Yeah, so it's part of the track, and really, a sprint race, everyone thinks, I have to make it into turn 1, and again, the Maverick Vignale kind of set off the dominoes, and it just set a little effect there as well. So we clearly both agree on the penalties, but it was just a messy sprint in general, because it wasn't great after that, because it opened up a gap. And we saw in the main race, well, it didn't really see that Binder could ever do anything to Pecco.
No, definitely not. It was, Martin kind of just created all the excitement of the MotoGP weekend, to be quite honest. Not a lot else happened, really. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Crashing in warm-up as well was interesting.
Yeah, taking his on that penalty. See, maybe that would have happened in the sprint.
Yeah, didn't he really would have been penalised?
Yeah. To be fair, I don't think you could penalise someone for crashing in the long lap penalty.
Oh no, I mean like that. He kind of would have served his own penalty by being out.
Yeah, I think that was also maybe partly why people were a bit outraged, because he kind of just bowled through and carried on. I think he might have lost a spot on like the exit, but
yeah,
he gained a lot from it. Like, let's be real, he's like 12th through that 4th going out the first corner. So he was definitely gained quite a bit from it. But there you go. That was the sprint. That was one Ducati rider. Let's talk about Pecco Bagnaia this weekend. I'm full of praise for him, because it was a fantastic weekend. I mean, I've probably been a bit critical of him in the past when he's made mistakes, and perhaps I've made comments about him not being sort of at the level of Quartararo and Marquez and things like that. But this is one of those weekends where he absolutely was. Like, he was every bit as good as like Lorenzo used to be. Marquez would be on his day. Fabio would be on his day. He was so much faster than everybody. Like, it was ridiculous. I've not seen anything like it for so long. Like, the whole week, and he's had weekends where he's won the sprint, he's won the race, and he's pulled a bit of a gap. But it was so much quicker than everybody. You look where the other Ducatis were. Even we know the other Ducatis were sort of up there, but like in terms of position, but in terms of time, they were nowhere near him. Look where his teammate was. That's a story for itself as well. But look where Bastianini was. Fair enough, in the sprint, he did get sent to the shadow realm at turn 1, but in the main race, he didn't. Obviously, Martin was obviously 3rd place in the sprint, but look what he had to do to get there. Like, it was, I suppose his weekend was compromised by the qualifying, I guess, in the end. But Bagnaia was just so much faster than everybody. Like, even Brad Binder, like, who is probably the most aggressive rider when you think about pulling a dive bomb, could not lay a glove on him. I mean, he's so good on the brakes, just so fast everywhere. He pulled away from everybody, managed his tyre perfectly, pole position as well. It was one of the best weekends I've ever seen. Like, it was unbelievable. He was so much better than everybody else. Like, I've never seen him that much better than everybody else. Like, I've seen him do weekends where he's been better than the other Ducati riders. Like, wow, that's pretty good. But this was like, wow. Like, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, today he was 2019 Marcus, and I think this season he is. If you don't look at his mistakes, which there's been a few to start the season, but you kind of forgive everyone. If you look back at Valentino's last title, he actually crashed a couple of times that year that you don't really think of, but it wasn't as
He was
clean.
going to have a couple of crashes in the season.
That's it. Like, and
you're so on the limit. Like, it's so difficult to.
And I think current day, I don't think
his mistakes were needless. I believe. I think that was more of the
possibly. Yeah, so it's made the title somewhat more entertaining with a couple of DNFs from him. But every week, right? Pecco's there. Now, he doesn't win every week, he doesn't win every race, but the guys that are battling him are never the same guys. Also, Ducati clearly have the best equipment on the grid. It's never the same guy battling him on the Ducati. 1 week it's Martin, 1 week it's Bezzecchi, some weeks it's Alex Marquez. It's always different guys. It's the 2019 Marquez season where it's always the number one Bologna bullet with Pecco on it that's in and about the victory positions. We're battling with Miller, battling with Binder, battling with everyone else I just mentioned. But it's just, every week it's someone else different there, and they just every week they nearly come off worse against him, and he's so good. And again, I have been also critical as well, thinking maybe I was kind of like this as well with Fabio, to be honest. When he's won his title, I was like, well, yeah, we like the chest protector thing and the arm pump, and he made mistakes here, and there was silliness. And then in his season afterward, so the 22 season, he impressed me way more by not even winning the title. It just showed me how good he was. I think Pecco's really nailed on to win this title. It's kind of like it's a lot more convincing than the other classes where he has such an advantage. He's so consistent, and he doesn't seem to have a weakness. He's decent in the wet. He's probably not a wet weather specialist, but he's good enough that he doesn't.
He's definitely gotten better. He used to be quite bad, but
he's not. Improved. He's not like Lorenzo. During Lorenzo's title charges, if there was a wet race, he did usually kind of go backwards. He's probably not at the level of like a Rossi through the years in the wet, where Wayne or dry Rossi was there. Pecco probably is a top 6, top 8 rider in the rain, but at least he doesn't go backwards. So I think if you look at Bastianini last year, some of the wet races he was missing him at the back of the grid nearly. So Pecco just about has nearly all the box ticks. He's an amazing qualifier, no question that he is brilliant over the one lap. We see it nearly every week. Consistency is near perfect. Obviously the odd mistake here and there that he's seemingly putting behind him. Racecraft, when he's one of the latest breakers, so that kind of gives you an advantage. I've never seen him too rash in a battle. We've seen him at Aragon against Marcus. Yeah, Le Mans maybe, I suppose.
It was a bit ragged that whole weekend. It was a bit out of character. It was strange.
Maybe just missing a small bit, I suppose, and kind of having to go above and beyond maybe. But he just ticks the box for me, and I think really we're really seeing what he can do now. And I think today was his 16th win, I think, in the class, 50 a podium. He's really turning into a top, and he's going to be soon a 2-time world champion in GP. Obviously won his Moto2 title in 18, I think.
Yeah, he won the Moto2 in 2018, didn't he?
And then moved up. Yeah, so it's just he's turning into a metronomic machine, and he has the braking of Valentino, probably has the corner speed and flow of Lorenzo, and consistency of pretty much both of them put together. So he has a lot going from, of course, on the best equipment, but he has Valentino in his corner. He does a bit of chatting with Casey, so he's just, when he crossed the line today, I was just thinking that just looks like Casey on that bike, though. He's just so dominant on it. He kind of has that Max Verstappen going on at the moment, where best rider, best bike, winning a lot. No matter what happens in the weekend, he somehow is always there. Isn't crashing a lot, even in practice and stuff like that. He's probably only gripe, and it's not really a major thing, is that he never starts the weekend very quick, but I suppose he just goes through the paces, and come when it matters, he's just there, and it's magical to watch him because he's so good on the bike. And a lot of people say maybe it's getting a bit boring with him winning, but you can't say anything against his talent. He is so good, so consistent, and I'm hoping throughout the season maybe he gets pushed a bit harder by maybe some other Ducatis, maybe the KTMs or the Aprilias, if they went a bit missing again this weekend. But it's the same thing. Like, we had Aleix battling last week in Silverstone. Aleix was 7th today. So again, it'll soon turn out to be a 2019 season where he wins it comfortably, no doubt. Barring injuries, there's no one that can really stop him, really. But he was fabulous. Hats off to him. 2 perfect results over the weekend.
Yeah, I don't really have any more to add to that. Just fantastic, like you say, just dominant. He's on the best equipment, but he's on the best equipment for a reason. Like he's good enough to get that equipment.
Cream
and
rises
I think
to the
also,
top.
yeah, exactly. And I think he utilizes it better than perhaps other riders. And I don't even mean just in terms of riding. Like we've heard before, like at Assen, for example, Bezzecchi beats him in the sprint. He goes and has a look at Bezzecchi's data. He makes some. Well, he doesn't obviously physically make the tweaks to the bike himself, but he gets the engineers to make some tweaks to the bike that he doesn't get his spanner out and stuff.
Gets the snap-on ratchets out.
Yeah, that's a secret to success. He does his own setups now. So he gets the engineers to change stuff, and then he wins on the Sunday based off that data. So he doesn't even use just necessarily like the bikes. He uses every little bit of the data, the technicians, and yeah, sure, that comes with being in the factory team. I think if you look at like Bezzecchi and Martin, for example, clearly he has an inbuilt advantage over them to an extent because he has better technicians and they have access to all the data too, but they can't use it, and he's got the proper factory support. But even still, it doesn't matter. That doesn't make that much difference in terms of the lap time that like he makes up today. Like it is pure riding. I just can't applaud him enough. But his friend Bezzecchi, obviously championship rival. I think Bezzecchi is still third in the championship now, right? I don't think he's got back up into second yet.
Still third. After the
sprint. After the current second place guy knocked him off. He had a brilliant race today. Obviously, we can't really comment on the sprint because it got ended after a corner. But he was perfectly on the pace today. Under the podium. Obviously, he had a great battle with Alex Marquez throughout the race. That was probably the most interesting part of the race, right? Just watching those two go at it for quite a while. Alex Marquez, actually, give a shout out to him. He's been very good the last couple of rounds. He's had decent pace in some sessions this year, but never really put it together in the weekend. But last couple of weekends, he's been a lot better. I think he's definitely been more of a threat for the podium and stuff like that. So I want to give a little shout out to him there. But yeah, it was great from Bezzecchi. Obviously, couldn't lay a glove on the lead two because, again, just they were so far in front. But to bounce back from being in the gravel, I suppose the tarmac run off, so you don't get all the way to the gravel, but to being knocked off at the first corner in the sprint, I think was overall pretty good. And he was very fast all weekend also. He looked like probably one of the faster riders. Just when it came to the race, he didn't have what the top two had, but to be fair, he's on a year-old bike, so can't really blame him too much for that one.
To be honest as well, the fact that he just wasn't in the top positions early, you never really know. What we've talked about, how probably not a great racetrack, and with the current Michelin tires and aero and ride-out devices and everything that goes with it, when you have that many riders at the front that are that quick and consistent and they all can brake so deep, we saw how hard it was for it to pass Alex Marquez, and there was no slight against Alex Marquez. He's been, like you said, since this kind of summer break, he went away, came back a different rider, and I think for Alex Marquez that he started the season thinking maybe I can do this, and he probably didn't have the ability to believe himself as much, and he's probably looked back at his season and thought, well, I should have done better in Le Mans, I shouldn't have crashed in Mugello, and probably should have done better there, and I really could have done better there, and it probably thought to himself, well, if I just take a step back, I can probably come forward. So he's been really consistent since he came back from summer break, and obviously sprint race win in Silverstone. So when Bezzecchi caught him, I thought this is not going to be an easy kind of pass, and it was clear that Bezzecchi had the speed over him. It looked like Alex Marquez was probably parking it quite hard in front of him. We saw one attempt from Bezzecchi when he went straight on turn one, but when he did pass him, lovely move, leveled him, and then just gapped him. It showed he had so much more speed, and I think it's hard to tell. I don't know who's quicker, Bezzecchi or Martin. I think Bezzecchi is more rounded. I think he's a better scrapper. I think he's a bit more Valentino in him, whereas I think Lorenzo, Jorge Martin's more the Lorenzo, where he just gets ultimate lean and lovely corner speed and is a great extractor of the lap time from the Ducati. So I think Bezzecchi really is a really well-rounded. Seems to be able to get a great qualifying lap out, but definitely is a good scrapper. We've seen him in some of the battles he's had so far this season with the likes of Pecco and stuff, so he really is a good battler. And I feel like Jorge Martin doesn't always come through the field as quickly as others, whereas Bezzecchi usually starts ticking riders off pretty quickly, starts taking names and stuff. So I was even more impressed then by Alex Marquez's performance today, holding him off at such a rate, because he held him off for a good 6-7 laps, I'd say, and eventually when he passed him, Luca Marini managed to jump on the bandwagon and go through as well. So good race from Marini today after a shocking Saturday. But
Bezzecchi, brilliant today. He was kind of faultless, really. Obviously, the one mistake just a bit deep into turn 1 against Marcus. But yeah, we could have seen something as well from him on Saturday. Obviously, it was a shame that he didn't really even make turn 1. He was on his head before even the apex of the corner. So it was just unfortunate because, again, we talk about if you're neutral, Pecco keeps seeming to get this luck where some of his riders fall into issues, and if they have a bad weekend, things like this seem to happen more to his rivals than Pecco, and that's kind of putting the nail in the coffin for the overall championship. But yeah, you can't really say anything against Bezzecchi this weekend. It was really strong, and definitely seemed to have learned from mistake from the feature race in Silverstone.
Yeah, it was good for him to bounce back from that. Actually, I was about to say that because I kind of forgot it as I was saying it. But yeah, like he obviously got knocked off at the first corner of the sprint. He didn't even really get a chance to make amends for what happened at Silverstone. But obviously today he did. He got back on the podium. Unfortunate that's still losing 9 points to Bagnaia, but hey ho, it's just how it goes, and it's better to bring home the points than to end up in the gravel. And obviously he's got a lot going on behind the scenes right now as well, with deciding what's going to happen next year. Is he going to stay at VR46? He could go to Pramac, so maybe that's taken his eye off the ball a little bit. So that could be why he was perhaps a little bit off Bagnaia this weekend. But in fairness, I think like you make a good point. If you're not first and second after the first lap, you don't pull away. And I think that's what was shown in both races this weekend, that you needed to be at the front right away. Otherwise, you just got stuck in the pack. So obviously Red Bull KTM home race this weekend. Obviously both Austrian companies obviously out the Red Bull ring, but massive thing for both of them, really, right? That they are like crackers and cheese. They're always together. Red Bull always with KTM, both Austrian companies. So it was a massive, massive weekend for all the KTMs, and in general across the three classes they did get some good results. But Brad Binder really performing at home. I guess it's really the closest he's going to get to a home race, with it being all the teams' home race, obviously with no South African Grand Prix, unfortunately. And he just dominated the other KTMs. They couldn't lay a glove on him. They were nowhere near him. He was P2, and they were 14th, 15th, and 16th, right? In the main race. Yeah. And that just says it all. I mean, he was fantastic in both the sprint and the main race. He tried the same tactic, got straight on the back of Bagnaia, tried to go with him. He did actually have a little go at trying to make a pass in the main race, but he just couldn't outbrake him. He got sort of alongside a little bit, but just wasn't able to do it. Clearly, the KTM's just not as good as the Ducati, so it's just very difficult for him. Obviously, the KTM does tend to work very well at the Red Bull Ring. Obviously, they've done a lot of testing here in the past, so the bike's DNA is sort of made for this track in a certain way, that they do have really good settings here. And obviously, the only other two manufacturers to win here are Ducati and KTM, so those are the two bikes you'd want to be on this weekend, I would say. But even still, the KTM wasn't as good as the Ducati. Binder tried everything with his talent, but in the end was sort of a distant second in both races. But similarly to Bagnaia, really, did it put a foot wrong with miles ahead of everybody else on his same bike. He's not particularly known for qualifying, but put it on the front row this weekend. So addressing one of his own sort of downfalls, if you like, something that's not so good at. And that's what put him in the position. I think he could be on the podium every weekend if he qualified better and started better. I know he's one of those riders that can make his way through the pack to an extent, but you can't really afford to not be in the top three, really, after the first couple of laps in MotoGP these days if you want any chance at the podium, because it's so difficult to make passes. You lose so much time in the opening laps, and you can't get it back, especially at a circuit like this where the tyre wear was so important. You couldn't push hard to bridge the gaps, whereas maybe at somewhere like Silverstone you could have done, because, well, the tyre wear is still quite high there, actually, but because the track is cooler, you can maybe push the bike a bit more. But yeah, I don't know where the other KTMs came in the sprint, but actually, Paul did very well on the sprint, didn't he? On the gas, he was P7, but Miller was nowhere all weekend. Very poor weekend for Miller. Not the track you want to have a poor weekend at either, especially when they're trying to find a space for Pedro Acosta. You wouldn't exactly want to be underperforming there, but he had an awful race. He had a good start, but he just got passed by everybody. I mean, it's one thing to be down in those positions, but I think he was last out of all of them, right? They both beat him on the gas bikes, which is an injured Paul and a rookie Augusto. It's not good to be beaten by them, especially when you were up in the podium spots at the start of the race. So it just shows again that Miller has not learned that you do not push 100% in a race where you have to look off the tyre at the start, because it doesn't work. And yet again, he's done the same thing. So, Binder, hats off to him. Poor race for Miller. I guess the gas guys, if you hold them by the same standard, I guess is kind of poor, but you never know exactly what kind of bikes they've got. Obviously, again, rookie and very injured rider. Paul actually had a very good weekend overall, I think, but based on how he came back. But Binder just, I'll hand it over to you, but Binder just absolutely dominated the KTMs.
He showed today why he is the premier, one of the top riders in the class. He is the Pecco of the Ducati, except just the Ducati is a wider operating window, so that's why we see them closer together. We saw Miller have a good start to the season, but as the Ducati's got more, like, you start the season, last year's bike at the start of a new season is always better because they've already done a full race weekend 12 months ago at the track you were just at previously. Each weekend, it slowly gets more and more in favour of the newer bike, and now we're seeing that the newer bike, Pecco's bike, is just getting into its stride now, and it's better, and Ducati have kind of figured out a few little issues with it. It's really wound into a great machine. Pecco's in tune with it, and that's why we're seeing these bigger gaps. KTM start season really well when Ducati probably didn't have it as kind of so kind of tightly contested in the company between getting the most out of the GP23, and the 22 was really working well and everything that goes with that. The KTM look closer, but now that the 23 stretched legs and got itself moving, there's still a good gap. The KTM isn't as good there. It showed today on the onboards that it just does not matter how well Binder gets out of the corner. He cannot match Pecco. Now, a lot of that is Pecco, 100%, but that Ducati is just definitely better than KTM. They have way too much spin. Apparently, all weekend they were having front locking at a track like this. That must have been hell to ride. I'd imagine that Jack is probably...
Maybe that kind of plays into it a bit then. Perhaps the others couldn't. It's like the Marquez syndrome, I guess.
Exactly,
like
yeah.
Honda, like he can ride around the front locking, but nobody else can.
And we know Miller's pretty heavy on the brakes. And again, Miller, everybody thought he'd have a poor season. He overperformed at the start of the season in Portimao, Jerez, and he's kind of gone missing. Double crash in Le Mans. Rough enough in Mugello. Hasn't really been on it for a few weeks now. He's been there about, but he's, like, in terms of results, he's not been there. And I think this weekend was really bad for him. I think the fact that he made it through Q1 and then did really, really, really hold his breath for a lap time in Q2, he really showed off his talent over one lap in that session, but just shows that over 28 laps, whatever it may be, he will use the tyres quickest. And it's just a shame because I just don't understand how he just can't figure out that that's his biggest weakness. He keeps saying that he's just missing something, but like, you're missing the hold back and go at 90% or 80% at the start of a race is his biggest issue. Fair enough, even if he has to hold back and is slow, then that's fair, but going that much slower at the last part of the race that you're being caught by your satellite teammates, that is not a good look for a factory rider. And of course, happening in front of all the big wigs from Red Bull and from KTM will not be good. But I definitely think he'll have strong showings throughout the rest of the season, but this was really off colour weekend from Jack. Augusto didn't really do much all weekend, didn't really, kind of went under the radar, much more like a normal rookie weekend. And to be fair, Paul, I was really impressed with Paul, considering in the full feature race he always was going to go backwards in terms of fitness and just getting back. He said going left at the moment, his left side of his body is quite weak, but did brilliantly in sprint, did adequately well in the full race, so hats off to him, I suppose. To finish off a Binder, it just shows why they've signed him for another 2 years this weekend. He'll be there till 2025. He's one of the best riders on the grid, and when KTM get that bike in the window, he will be a serious threat for the championship, and I look forward to it because I really like watching Binder. I love watching his style on the bike, and he's just a breath of fresh air, really, because he's not like a lot of the riders. He really drifts it in, and he makes up so much time on corner entry. It's a really entertaining rider to watch.
Yeah, he really is. He really is interesting to watch. Like, it just something special, isn't he? Just fantastic rider. And of course, you mentioned obviously previously that the KTM started off the start of the season. It was somewhat near the Ducati. We were talking about earlier on in the season, potentially was there going to be a title fight between Binder? Would Binder be in the championship hunt? But it seems like not really. No one's really got a hand on Bagnaia now. Probably this is a turning point in the championship this round, that just when Bagnaia is feeling it, doesn't matter what track it is, doesn't matter how good you perform, just can't beat him, and he just keeps pulling further and further away. Whilst his rival have poor weekends. To be fair, Binder this round has minimised. He's had the smallest points drop he could possibly have had with Bagnaia winning both those races. So to be fair, it's probably helped him out in the championship. But you've got Bezzecchi being knocked off in the first race, Martin obviously having the long lap in this one that's compromised him, and obviously the qualifying mistake. Zarco, I'm not saying that Zarco particularly a rival, but he was P4 in the championship, so I'm just talking about the people that are closest. Again, he got knocked off in the sprint. So this could really be, I think it was kind of already looking like it was a Bagnaia to lose championship, but after this weekend, it is, isn't it now? Really, this is a massive turning point in the championship, I would say.
100%. We've just seen basically what the actual gap is from Pecco and Ducati to everyone else. And regardless of who turns up each week, like Binder was riding above and beyond not his talent, but the equipment he has. He rode above everyone else for the two races, did pretty well in qualifying, which again is his weakness. And probably still KTM's probably not their best thing. They're better this year over the one lap, obviously seen by Jack being pretty much there in every Q2 session and stuff like that. So it's probably swung a small bit where they've managed to get more over tyre immediately, and they probably don't have the extreme tyre saving that they had over the last 2 or 3 seasons in the latter parts of the races. So I think maybe they need to hold that overall pace on one lap and keep the tyre more for the latter part of the races, where they can maybe give someone a bit more of a pressure run to the line and stuff like that. But really, it's a big turning point, because who's going to challenge Pecco now? Like, really, there's no one, and Pecco is annihilating them really in points. And like, if we go back, if he didn't crash in Texas, if he didn't crash in Argentina, Jesus, he'd nearly have his name already on it. It would be one of the most dominating seasons we've seen for a while. Like, it would be 2019 again. It would be that sort of level, because he's there come rain, shine, Saturday, Friday, Sunday. He's there. It doesn't really need to be a Pecco weekend anymore. If he's having a tough weekend, he still seems to be there. Like when he crashed out in Le Mans with the collision with Maverick, he wasn't down in P12. He was still in the top group. Like, so he's always there regardless of the track every week. And I think there's been a kind of a mental switch maybe since we came back from the summer break for Pecco, that he seems very relaxed, and it's not coming easy, but it's just all going the way he needs it. And I think the fact that we don't have the Japanese manufacturers challenging them, KTM are the newest one in the class. They're always going to be lacking data. Ducati have been there for 20 years now, so they know their stuff to a certain extent. Aprilia have come and go over the last couple of years. They're only kind of getting back to the front now, so you're kind of going up against two of the most younger teams that probably don't have as much experience. You'd imagine if Honda was in this battle, or Yamaha, they might have something to do against the Ducati, but they're just so far back that can't really do anything. So for the rest of the championship, we're going to see probably Binder challenge. We'll see Miller. We might see Martin some weekends. We're going to see a lot of Bezzecchi, and we're going to see a lot of Pecco wins and probably front rows and podiums and pole positions and fastest laps. He's going to just romp away with it, I can tell. He's so good. Can't get over how good he is lately, because I always knew the speed was there. It's just the fact that now he looks like he's doing it at will, which I didn't think he actually had in him. It's just something I think he's learned in the second year after being a champion. He's taken it on. I think we thought we'd go back to Moto2 Canet winning a race, and could change his career. Becoming a GP World Champion has definitely changed Pecco, and he's so good now. And really, how many titles could he win is what I'm kind of thinking now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Just he's taken that next step, and just, I know we're gushing so much about Bagnaia on this podcast, but you've seen the race, you know why we're doing it. Like,
and we've been harsh on him before, like, so
we have been. So I think when he's done a good job, I think we're going to give him the props for doing the good job. And like, I'm not going to try and say that like, one race will swing my opinion, but I think this weekend has altered my opinion on Bagnaia now. I actually probably hold him in a higher regard than I did previously, similar to the way I do with Rins now after Austin. I feel like I hold Rins at a higher regard than I did before he did that. So, yeah, it is one of those things. Just, just an amazing weekend. But one of the biggest talking points, I suppose, coming out of the weekend is the stewards. Obviously, we mentioned the Martin penalty, and then obviously with Fabio Quartararo and Savadori in the sprint race, how he got given the penalty straight away, but then obviously Martin got his later on. Again, just the questions about the consistency of the stewards and the weird ways they make decisions. Just, I still don't really get them. Like, why they do these things. Like, I don't get. Like, if everybody in that incident crashes at turn 1, absolutely fine to investigate it after the race because nobody's still in the race anyway. So what is the point? Like, I suppose if Martin crashes in that, fair enough. Like, go and assess it after the race because he's not in the race anymore. But when he still stayed on, I can see why people are calling for a penalty in that race. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe it was a deliberate decision to penalise him in the main race so that he got more of a penalty. But then Fabio gets penalised for hitting Savadori, which again was a strange incident, right? That was very weird, like the way that happened. But just the actual crash itself, I mean. I'm trying to think of other situations from the weekend. Do you know if Nepa got a penalty, actually? I don't know if you saw Moto3 qualifying. But he sort of like rolled on the
in front of
crest,
me. Yeah. I heard nothing afterwards, which that should have been a back to good start for me. That should have been a huge penalty.
Absolutely. Yeah, unless it was a bike problem.
Exactly. But like he was on the racing line. Even if the bike stops, you pull onto the grass at that speed.
Yeah.
You don't stay on the racing line. That could be a helicopter crash if it goes wrong.
Yeah. So I'm not. That's just one that came to mind, but just weird. Again, I don't understand the choices. Like, in fairness, I actually kind of agree with the penalty decisions they made this weekend. Aside from, I'd probably have given Martin a single long lap. But if they want to be consistent, a double long lap. Sorry, but if they want to be consistent and only give a single, I don't particularly have a problem with that because they're being consistent. So I can't exactly moan, but just the way and the time they make the decisions seems strange.
If you knock a rider off, it's a long lap penalty. Zarco crashed, Bezzecchi crashed, Bastianini and Fabio were pretty much out of it. So was Vinales. That's 6 riders there nearly that were. The race is a run, we'll say. So if that doesn't qualify for double long lap penalty, I don't really know what does, to be honest. I don't like them not penalising him in that race. He's made a decision in that race to do something that is against the rules. You penalise him there. You want him in the race to do something special on Sunday. You don't want to bring a penalty forward that can take him out of a battle because you open up the race. You make gaps that you don't want at a track already that isn't great for racing, and the current bikes don't really go that well there. We already touched on Nepa. That has to be a penalty unless, again, like Rhys says, if it's a mechanical. But again, a lot of things you just don't get any clarity. They don't clarify. There's very little transparency with the stewards. A lot of the decisions are. That's the decision. We will not clarify why. It took days after Aston to find out why Pedro Acosta didn't get a second long lap after it looked like he touched the green. They said nothing. Nothing was said. They just would not talk about it. Eventually, we dragged it out of them that from their camera angle it looked like that, and it kind of long or short, they believed he didn't do anything wrong. But like there was so much controversy immediately after the race that they just went quiet. They said nothing, and they just let it drag on instead of putting it to bed straight away.
Tweet that out straight away, like the picture of like this is why we didn't give him penalty.
Exactly, like it has to be immediate.
Well, better yet, release reports.
Exactly,
release report. Rider not 50, he's not 51 anymore, is he? Rider 37, Pedro Acosta. Didn't have to redo his long lap penalty as was served correctly, as seen in the screenshot from 10, 48, 58 seconds or something like that.
Very similar to Ready F1, kind of put it all there.
Exactly. I think they actually do quite a good job of that. I mean, again, whether you want to get into their steward decisions sometimes a bit weird, but I think generally they're quite transparent about why they've decided to do something.
Exactly. And I think just they were the opposite, where like everything's being closed doors. We're always being like, be quiet now, don't ask questions why we did that. Like that's the decision is final, there's no way we're overturning it, we're not explaining why. I feel like they're after getting so much slack for so long that they're like, well, we don't have to explain ourselves. We're the stewards. We're going to do what we think is right, and that's it. Our say is final. We're not going to change anything. I think since we've started this podcast, we're on maybe 34 episodes, 35 now, or something like that. And there's not a podcast I don't think we've not talked about how.
I think even in the first episode we were moaning about the stewards. So.
That's it. Like, so it's gone on for too long now, and I think it's it's a shame that every week we have to nearly end the podcast with stewards or start the podcast with stewards or spend a section on the stewards when it's kind of getting a bit tedious really to have to keep going over these same points, at the fact that there's no transparency, they don't follow their own rules, the inconsistencies, the questionable decisions. Like, I'm still confused why Pecco got a penalty for sitting up Jack Miller and Horath.
Yeah, what the hell was that?
Like, and again, did they explain it? Did they beep? So no, they didn't do much that week. So,
and then it was also a different penalty than normal. It was a drop place. It wasn't even a long lap.
I know. It like so confusing.
I mean, it would have been criminal to give him a long lap for that, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Yeah, I know. It's like they're experimenting, but like you don't experiment on a race weekend. There's a rule book. You follow the rules. What it says in the rule book is what goes. I understand that. Like, okay, fair enough. We'll take the Marini and Martin one. Some people see that as Martin's fault. Some people see Marini didn't give space. There's a bit of debating whether whose fault was that. I think it's widely agreed that Martin went for a bit of a lunge. Marini squeezed him, hoping to stay ahead, and there was a small bit of collision, and it was unfortunate that he crashed. It wasn't...
these things happen sometimes.
Yeah,
and if there is debate over whose fault it is, then clearly it's not clear enough to actually give a penalty. Whereas no one's saying, oh, well, clearly that was caused by Zarco at turn one. Like no one's saying that.
Exactly, yeah, like that. So it's just the inconsistencies kill me, because next weekend, who says that we don't have a big... Catalonia's next, so what if Nakagami redoes that? He didn't get a penalty for that. Just that's another one like that we go back to last year. It's just so many instances that you go, okay, that is the rule for that. Next weekend it happens again, and they change their mind. They go, oh yeah, that's actually double on that penalty now, we changed it over the week off. They don't explain why. They don't have a public information system that we can figure out why they're making decisions, to understand it. And like, you hear it when you listen to either World Feed, TNT, or maybe Spanish, or whatever media you watch it from. It's nearly always the commentators like, what? I didn't really think that was a penalty, that's harsh. And they're nearly always going against the stewards, which are 9 times out of 10 in a commentary. You have an ex-rider, usually a top level rider who have been racing at that level, so they kind of know themselves what a penalty is and what isn't. And it's just a shame, really. I think we probably should wrap up the podcast now, because we have gone over the 90-minute mark, but it's just a shame that each week we have to bring up the stewards, and it's killing racing in some aspects, because penalties for things that aren't penalties, and then questionable decisions, getting stupid penalties, and then straight up penalties, we'll review it after the race. It's like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there should be exact procedure
100%
for these things. Like, maybe it should be within like 30 minutes of incident happening on track. There needs to be a penalty award or something like that.
Yeah.
Something a bit arbitrary like that. It's easy to understand for everybody. But like I say, yeah, we are getting over the that 90-minute mark now, so we'll bring this podcast to a close. So, despite actually being a bit of a dull race, we have quite a lot to talk about, mainly a bit of controversial things, and obviously a bit of just talking about how impressive Bagnaia and Binder's weekends were. But they needed saying. It needed saying.
100%.
You got to do it justice. Like, we'll slate them when they do a bad job, but we'll also applaud them when they do a good job. So, hopefully you have enjoyed that one. If you are listening on Spotify, please do rate the podcast 5 stars. Also, leave a comment. We discovered there was a comment section recently, which we didn't realise. We have seen the comments, so we really like to see some more. If you do want to tell us anything, we will see them. We hadn't seen them previously, but we know where they are now. So if you do want to leave a comment, it's appreciated. Also, if you're listening on Dill's YouTube channel as well, leave a comment and a like there. That also helps us out quite a lot. But we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time now then for the Catalan Grand Prix.